Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the PeopleSoft Global Payroll SIG. SIG being special interest group. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alex Lightstone, and I'm a managing consultant here at Version 1 with PeopleSoft Managed Services and indeed PeopleSoft Payroll falling under my remit. So just to start by walking through the agenda for today's session, there's divided into a few key areas. Obviously, any sort of updates relating to the end of the current tax year, the updates for the start of the next tax year, and also some recent and upcoming changes that Oracle have delivered for the UK payroll, PeopleSoft payroll product, and then of course any other business. So let's start by looking at the changes for the end of the current tax year. The only change really, as you would expect at the end of the tax year, is to the P60 template. There's two key changes here. Obviously, updating the template with the correct tax year value, but also the addition of the statutory parental bereavement pay field, which obviously was a new item this year. Similarly, the same field has been added to the RTI adjustment details page and will be included on any amended FPSs that you would submit following the end of the current tax year. Moving on to the start of year updates, I've grouped these into kind of four key areas: national insurance and statutory absence payments, tax and student loan, just a reminder around the off-payroll worker rules, and any sort of changes that are happening to RTI. So firstly, just looking at the national insurance contributions, there are some minor changes to the thresholds, as shown here. I've included the 2020 being the current tax year and the 2021 the upcoming tax year values. So you can see that there are some minor differences, but I don't think there's anything too significant in there. And as you would expect, there are no change to the contribution percentages. Similarly, there's a sort of a minor change to the absence payment rates. So for statutory maternity, statutory adoption, share parental, and statutory paternity pay, the weekly rate increases from £151.20 to £151.97, and that will take effect on the week starting 4th of April. SSP also increases, again by a relatively small amount, from £95.85 to £96.35. Also being introduced this year is the employer's national insurance holiday for veterans. Now, I'm sure you've read about this, and at this point, the legislation is still in the proposed status, although that should be changing fairly soon. The proposal, and so this is still subject to change, is that there would be no employer contributions up to the upper secondary threshold, which, as shown here, is £967 a week or £4,189 per month for the first year of employment of former veterans. There are no changes to the payroll for the forthcoming tax year. You should still pay your employer contributions as normal. Those contributions will, at the moment, it's been said that those contributions can be reclaimed sometime after 6th of April 2022. HMRC are planning to include the relief for that through PAYE from the 6th of April 2022. But as I say, for this year, you should continue to make the contributions as normal, and then a mechanism will be provided to claim them back from 6th of April next year. To qualify for this, the employee or the person that you're hiring must have completed at least 1 day of regular armed forces training. So it's not too stringent on the requirement. And similarly, there's no time limit on when they left the armed forces. So, it doesn't have to be within, say, a year of them having left. This is currently planned to be in place from 6th of April 2021 up until the 5th of April 2024, but there is already provision for it to be extended beyond that date, and that will be reviewed nearer the time. Moving on to the changes to tax, PAYE. Obviously, as you would expect, the changes take effect from 6th of April, and with the emergency tax code being 1257L for the new tax year, so a slight increase there. As with the devolved nature of the UK nowadays, obviously there are different tax rates and so on across the various regions. Obviously, Wales actually has the power to set its own taxes, but this year they've decided to follow the rates and bands as set by the Westminster government. So, in case there are any Welsh nationalists on the call, I haven't negated the fact that Wales can set its own tax. It's just that those rates are the same as England and Northern Ireland this year. So, for England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, as indicated by the emergency tax code, the personal allowance will be £12,570 for the year, which is a slight increase on last year by £70. Don't spend it all at once. With the 20% threshold being 37,700, and then obviously 45% applying from £150,000 per year. Moving on to Scotland, where obviously the situation is slightly more complicated, so it gets its own slide. Personal allowance will be the same as the rest of the UK at £12,570. 19% tax on annual earnings above the threshold to £2,097. 20% from £2,098 to £12,726. 21% from £12,727 to £31,092. And then 41% from 31,093 to 150,000, and then just slightly higher than the rest of the UK at 46% for earnings above 150,000. For student loans, the big change this year will be the addition of Plan Type 4, but that only applies to student loans in Scotland. As with other student loan plan types 1 and Plan Type 2, this will be calculated at 9% of the employer's earnings, but the threshold will be set at £25,000 for the forthcoming tax year. For the remaining plan types 1 and Plan Types 2, there is a small increase in the threshold. The postgraduate plan or Plan Type 3, there are no changes. So just a reminder on this slide that the off-payroll worker rules, where we had a bit of a false start on this last year, will now come into force from April this year. In terms of changes to the PeopleSoft application, there are no new changes for this year because obviously the legislation is more or less the same as last year. But just a reminder of the addition of the off-payroll worker field, as highlighted in the slide in the sort of top right corner of the screen, or the image in the top right corner of the screen, and where you can flag when someone is an off-payroll worker. Oracle have also delivered a new payroll formula, GBR FM off pay, and this can be used to identify people who are off payroll workers, because obviously there will be certain parts of the payroll calculation which wouldn't apply to them. You know, a classic example of that being perhaps statutory absences. So the idea is that you can use this formula as a conditional formula on the process list to prevent certain sections from being processed where the person is an off payroll worker. Moving on to the changes to RTI, the disguised remuneration income field has been removed from the FPS and no longer needs to be reported. Obviously, in line with the student loan changes for Scotland, the plan type 4 has obviously been added to the list of plan types. And then on the EPS, the diminished state aid and the value of that in euros have been removed. I've also included the RTI namespace schemas here. So that's when you set up the RTI XML details for the forthcoming tax year. You'll need to enter those into the PeopleSoft application. So perhaps most importantly, when are the patches available? So this is documented on the Oracle support site under the doc ID given here, 2711333.1. A lot of the patches, as you can see, are now available. So the changes to the P60 and so on for the end of year are available and were included in PUM image 36. Changes to RTI have shipped as part of image 37. And equally, the student loan changes are also included in image 37. The start of year update, which contains the NI, the NI threshold changes and the absence of statutory rates and so on, and indeed tax and pension changes, that isn't released yet, but based on what Oracle are saying, it should be available next week. Now, those changes will be included in PUM image 38, but obviously that will be too late for the start of the tax year. So Oracle will be releasing those as what's called a PRP, which is effectively an individual patch. Obviously, we don't have the patch ID yet because it hasn't yet been released. And it's just worth noting here that there is the potential that there may be further changes in March. When the government released the budget, the rates and the NI rates and tax rates and so on that we've seen thus far are of course provisional until the budget has been released. So what do you need to do to get the updates installed? I've just produced a sort of slightly color-coded diagram here, basically showing the various steps that need to be taken in order to get these updates into the PeopleSoft application. It looks like there's quite a lot there. Actually, it's probably not as bad as it looks. So the first thing is to make sure that your PeopleSoft PUM environment is up to date and is on the latest image, which is image 37. You're going to need image 37 for some of the updates, and once the start of year PRP is released, that will also need to be installed on top of image 37. So your PeopleSoft update manager environment must be at image 37. Doesn't mean your PeopleSoft application needs to have image 37 installed in its entirety, of course, but just that the PeopleSoft update manager, which is the environment that's used for patching your PeopleSoft environment, must be up on the latest level. Once the start of year PRP is released next week, obviously that needs to be installed as well. And then you need to extract all the relevant bug IDs from the image and install those in a test environment. Obviously then, you'll need to just check for any changes that may be needed to your own configuration. A great example of that would be the formula that I mentioned that Oracle have delivered to identify off-payroll workers. That may need to be included within some of your own custom configuration, or indeed on your process list. Obviously, modify the configuration as necessary, and then test the update itself, and of course, changes that you've made. As mentioned already, the rates and so on that have been announced are all provisional, so there is always the chance that something else may change following the release of that last start of year update, in which case obviously you'll need to download and install any additional PRPs that Oracle provide and then retest. And assuming you're happy with everything, you'll then obviously migrate your migrate the bug IDs to your production environment, which will then apply all the latest updates. But obviously that needs to be in place for the April payroll. So the previous section was obviously about sort of the legislative changes that are being applied or that are needed for the forthcoming tax year. This next section is just looking at some of the product updates that Oracle have released recently. Some of these are bigger than others. I think certainly the first, in my opinion, the first three, they're not particularly big changes. They're not particularly earth-shattering, but I think they will make a significant difference, and they plug some significant gaps in some of the sort of processes and functionality that was available. So the 5 key areas we've identified to look through today is firstly the automated creation of calendar groups, and indeed the absence and population of calendars for absence forecasting, the ability to add comments to your accumulator adjustments, the change that retro triggers can now be viewed even once they've been processed. We'll also talk briefly about the Global Payroll chatbot that Oracle have released, and I'll also touch briefly on some changes that may need to be made with regards to EU settlement status following Brexit. So the first thing I wanted to touch on is the automated calendar group creation process. So this process is dual purpose. You can use it to create calendar groups in bulk, and you can also use it to pre-populate the absence forecasting templates for those of you who are using the absence management module. So obviously, Global Payroll for some time has had the ability to automatically create the period IDs and the pay and absence calendars in bulk for a year or 2 years in advance. Now, the big gap in functionality until now has been the creation of the calendar groups, which has had to be done manually. So the first part of this process is it will allow you to create calendar groups in bulk. So you could create a year's worth of calendar groups, for example, in one go just by running this process. As an additional enhancement, you can actually also create both the period IDs and the pay and absence calendars as well as the calendar groups, all from this one page, all at the same time. There are a couple of areas where you might not want to do that, and you can still use the existing automated processes to create the period IDs and the calendars, and then come to this page just to create the calendar groups. But I think this is a big win for anyone who's had to sit there and create a year's worth of calendar groups in one go. Even more so for those of you running weekly payroll. The other big win on this process is for those using absence management around absence forecasting. So absence forecasting, it either allows you to check an employees or for employees themselves to check their leave balance at a given point within the year, but it also allows employers to actually check they have sufficient remaining annual leave balance before booking an annual leave absence, for example. Now, as part of the setup for that, you have to set up what's called a template calendar group, which effectively holds all the calendars that the forecasting process is going to use to create and calculate the balances. That can be a very time-consuming process, and again, this process will allow you to add absence calendars to the forecasting template for a date range. It can be over a number of years if you wish, but again, I think this is a big time saver and definitely a big win that will make the administration of the payroll much easier. The second new feature is around the ability to add comments when you're entering an accumulator adjustment. Now, as you can see from the screenshot on the screen, when you enter an amount, there is also a reason field where you can add an explanation behind, as to why you're making the adjustment. However, I'm sure everybody on the call has found that there are some limitations to the length of the reason field, and it doesn't really allow you to put in very much detail. As you can see from the screenshots there, there is a new button labeled comments, and when you click on that, that will pop up a window as shown on the slide here, where you can enter a much longer comment as to why you're making the adjustment. This obviously allows you to add in a lot more detail behind the adjustment which will prove useful for auditing and so on, if the reason for the adjustment is ever queried. The next enhancement that Oracle have provided is the ability to view retro triggers once they've been processed. Now, this addresses a personal bugbear of mine, which is that obviously, yeah, you can see retro triggers for the payroll up until the point where the payroll processes them. When you're then reviewing the results or checking the payslip and you're wondering why has that person had retro, you've got no way of actually viewing the trigger that created it other than by asking a technical resource to actually go in and query the underlying source data. Oracle have now changed that so that you can now view the retro triggers even once they've been processed. So so the payroll will pick up the retro trigger as normal, but then when you go to the retro triggers, when you go to view the retro triggers, you will still be able to see that retro trigger even after it's been identified. Probably worth noting here that actually the status of the trigger can't be changed once it's been processed. So much as per the existing functionality, if you do need to actually cancel a trigger, for example, then you will need to go. Then you would still need to cancel the employee via the pay status page. Go back to the triggers page, cancel it, and then rerun the employee. However, I still think this is a big win. Because as I say, where an employee has retro, you can now see why they have retro without having to cancel them from the payroll first. Also worth noting, the triggers will remain visible until you have finalized the calendar group. So once you finalize the calendar group, then the trigger is no longer available. But actually, no longer available to view, but actually it is still in the database. So as you would have now, if for any reason after finalizing you needed to check something, you can still have your technical resources go into the database and pull out the relevant data. Another more significant change from Oracle is the addition of the Global Payroll chatbot. Now, chatbots are something that Oracle are rolling out across pretty much the whole range of modules within the PeopleSoft applications. They've also rolled out chatbots for the benefits and absence management modules as well. Now, the main idea behind the chatbots is that they can automate responses to users to frequently asked questions. As you're seeing on the slide here, some of the questions that the Global Payroll chatbot can answer are things like download my latest payslip, how much was my tax deduction, I want to edit my bank account, or can you show me my payment distribution, or which bank account my money will be paid to. Now, as I say, the idea behind the chatbots is that they can effectively take over and free up some of your team from having to respond to frequently asked routine questions that you get from employees. Now, one thing to note with the chatbot functionality is that it does require a subscription to the Oracle Digital Assistant, which is the platform which powers the chatbots. So there is a cost implication there. In all honesty, rolling out the chatbots, I suspect, is something that you would want to look at more holistically. So it probably doesn't make sense just to roll out a chatbot solely for Global Payroll. It would make more sense to roll it out as part of a wider implementation across, for example, the benefits and absence management modules. And then final point for this section is around the EU settlement status changes that are coming in from the applications up to 30th of June this year. There's no real impact on payroll for this, but I just thought it was worth mentioning because this is data that you may well need to record. So EU settlement status applies to European Union or European Economic Area and Swiss citizens who were resident in the UK before the 31st of December 2020. By and large, basically means that they can continue with the rights that they enjoyed up until that point. It breaks down into two different sort of statuses. There's what's called settled status, which basically applies for anyone who has lived in the UK for at least 5 years. And then there is what's called pre-settled status for those who have not been in the UK for that period. Key differentiator between the two is that the pre-settled status with the pre-settled status, you can only leave the UK for up to 2 years. If you leave the UK for longer than 2 years, you would lose your pre-settled status. Whereas with settled status, you can leave the UK for up to 5 years and still retain that status as long as you return within those 5 years. Pre-settled status can transition to settled status once the individual has been resident in the UK for the required 5 years. As I mentioned, there's no real impact on the payroll calculation here, and in fact, Oracle aren't going to be delivering any changes for this. They have provided some instructions on how this can be managed via the citizenship status configuration options within the application. So this is pretty straightforward. You would go to the citizenship status setup page where you can add in the various citizenship statuses for each country, and obviously for the UK here. And you would add those in. You would add those into as additional statuses, and then they will appear on the identification page under the citizenship passport section. And you can then record whether someone has that status of EU settled or EU pre-settled. Just down to the sort of final point now, just around any other business. So basically, yeah. So here at version 1, we are looking. We would like to sort of form a group or to collate some group feedback, really, to drive forward some enhancements predominantly for the PeopleSoft UK payroll product. Now, our thinking behind this is that, as we've seen in the previous section, there are some small tweaks that can be made, which really can make a big difference. And I suspect a lot of people probably have the same have to have the same wish list of those small tweaks. So what I would like to do is kind of reach out to everybody here on the session today over the next couple of weeks to basically collate any sort of requirements or any sort of small tweaks that you would like to see. I will then take that forward and discuss that further with Oracle. I have some good contacts at Oracle that I can position that with, and hopefully we can encourage Oracle to drive forward some of those sort of smaller enhancements. At the same time, again, we'd also be interested in hearing about perhaps larger changes that you may wish to see that perhaps Oracle wouldn't necessarily have on their radar to deliver. An example of this could be a payroll dashboard using the new Kibana functionality that's available in recent PeopleTools versions. So again, I'd certainly like to hear from you on that as well, because it may be that's something that we can then, we at version 1 can then build and then pass around to the wider group. So my ask of this would be to please, I'll be contacting you after the session anyway, just to send you the link to the recording. If you're happy to participate in this, and I'd like you to please just send me a phone number, and then maybe we can just have a quick 15-minute chat just to talk around any sort of areas or tweaks that you would like to see with the Global Payroll product. All right, well, that's the end of today's session. So on behalf of version 1, I'd very much like to thank you for attending. I hope you found it useful. If you do have any questions in the meantime, please do get in touch. Thank you, and goodbye.